You just need a laptop to present with.
Yeah, you want to? You can just run it.
Okay.
I'll mail you the slides. They're coming now.
Yes.
So, Chris, where's the champagne?
Is that mic working? Make sure that one is working. Sorry. Good afternoon. This is Thursday, I think. Thursday? Yes, Thursday. This is the Sidr working group. If you think you're in a different working group, you're in the wrong room and you should move. Or you could stay. It might be fun. Hopefully this is our last face-to-face meeting. We'll see how it goes. That's our plan. We had a little presentation on the laptop doesn't want to work event, so give us a moment while Jared fiddles around and gets it to work because it'll work on his, not mine. Thinking. Screen. Good.
Hi, Sandra. That's not Sandra.
No, sorry. Beside me is not Sandra, but Jared, of course. Sandy is at home. She could not come. Do you want to do this part? Do you want to let them do that?
Sure.
Or you can just flip.
I can do next slide.
Okay. That's probably safer. Okay, now we're really ready. That's us. We're here in Seoul. Today's Thursday. Sidr working group. Again, if you think you're in the wrong place, you should leave or stay because it might be fun. Next, please. Note well, you've seen this. We'll see the next one too. Right? New note well, summarize, less words. Next. Oh, third one, great. Because always the 3 options, much better. Next. Here's where all the stuff is. There's most of that doesn't really matter anymore, I guess. But anyway, okay. There's a Jabber room. Somebody will be I got to ask for a Jabber scribe eventually here. We have somebody taking notes, I think. Maybe I can take notes. I guess. Can somebody Jabber scribe? I'll wait while I'm finding notes. All right, thank you. We have a Jabber scribe volunteer.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Dan. All right, and I'll take notes. Okay. Oh, there's blue sheets coming around. Please sign them. So the next time we have a meeting, we can make sure to get the right size room. We have a minutes taker. That's me. We have a Jabber scribe. That's Dan. And we have an agenda, which we can go smash up in a minute here. Okay. We have some word group status. So I'm going to have to. This isn't entirely. Well, maybe it is accurate. I didn't look. We have a bunch of things, often publication requests, which our ADs, in quotes, are working on. I think there are 3 ADs, but mostly Alvaro's been cranking away on these. We have some things in last call. Grab all the slides and we'll read them later. A couple things got published, which is super great. And we have a couple documents which I think Joel's going to cover at least the intent behind later. We're going to move some documents off to the new group, new working group in the ops area in the next little while. Next. Okay. All right. So we published 31 RFCs. Drafts in the editor queue. Maybe that's 0. I think there might actually be 1 or 2 in the editor's queue at this point. IESG is processing. I don't know exactly if that just means IESG strictly or Alvaro on his own. There's like 6 or 7 documents at least in Alvaro's queue for us, maybe as many as 9. Anyway, numbers and words. Next. Okay. Gosh, man. I should have read Sandy's slides before I walked in here. Okay. So there's 7 active documents we're still dealing with. Again, some of those are getting moved to the ops area eventually by Chicago, hopefully. Next. Oh, there's Alvaro. Okay, finally, agenda. So we've done the first part, and unless there's anybody have any questions about the administrative stuff? Going once, going twice. Great. Joel, would you like to present? Oh, presenters need to stay inside the pink box,
Yes.
please. Thank you.
Just see next slide.
Yep. Next slide, please. Hey, so this is going to be real fast. So we proposed this just after the last IETF meeting, 96, as the successor in the place where we would house the remaining working documents that are not being advanced by the routing ADs. This was relatively well received. It actually has been chartered. The ISD approved it as of 11/8. We have 2 chairs installed. You will notice one of them looks kind of familiar. Well, actually, both of them look familiar. One of them is currently the chair, the chair here. That should be a little continuity. It should give us some fresh blood. And I think one of the things that we now have to work on, apart from actually starting this effort, is what do we do next? So we have charter items that take us through the end of 2017. Most of those documents already exist. So the act of creating them and bringing them to the working group and asking for consensus to adopt them is essentially already a solved problem. And that means what remains is to do that work. But I don't think Sidr ops will be done by any means just because those documents are completed. I would actually recommend that people take a look at the charter as it exists now and take a look at the mailing list, which is fresh and shiny, and you should join it. This effort will commence. So I think, next slide, please. I think they should be done. So these are the documents that were fed out of Sidr. These are our initial work items. And next slide, please. There's our mailing list. Please subscribe.
Could you back up?
One, okay.
Thank you.
Yep. Please subscribe. And next slide, please. Should be it. Oh, there's our final charter. I think very important to me and feedback that we got from you folks was that operators doesn't just mean network operators. It means CA operators. It means regional, national, and local internet registries. It means the people developing the relying party software, because that stuff has to run. And it means the research and measurement community that are working on this stuff all the time. So that definition should actually cover pretty much everyone in the room, I hope. If not, I'm sorry we missed you. But yeah, I think you belong in Sidr ops. except maybe Alvaro, who's going to take a rest. No, I hope he won't be so fed up with us that he leaves us to our own devices. Yeah. He would be. He will hopefully not be surprised when these arrive at the ISG. Next slide, please. Okay.
Right. Does anybody have any questions for Joel?
Dan York, just could you put that charter back up there for a second? So,
That's the
Okay.
upper half.
all right. Well, I was just curious because when you say that the term operator, I agree with that expanded definition, but are you also missing like regular kind of ISPs, network operators and things?
No, I think that was the one that was. I think that's the one that we started out with, right? Those people are definitely operators.
Well, no, I mean, I think it's great that you've expanded that. It's good. I was just curious. As I was reading that, it's kind of like, well, wait, what about kind of regular? But it's all good.
Right. So, the operation of Sidr aware networks is, I think, where this comes from. That was intended to expand the definition to include those folks. All right.
Yeah, Tim Ruijs, Ripens to see. I had a question about the chart at work, if you will, or well, not sure if that's a correct phrase, but the items that are already listed for the first milestone. So how does it work if we want to bring in new work, or potentially move some of the work that's currently in Sidr over because it happens to be more operational?
Yeah. So the current Sidr working group, in my understanding, is going to get closed down as soon as, if not by the end of this meeting, as soon as the work items that are passing through the ISG are properly processed. So if you're considering new work, you will the way to ask if it's appropriate to do it in Sidr is to actually kind of look at the charter and see if it's covered, and then bring it to the mailing list, and we can consider it.
Dan York relaying for Sandy Murphy, who says must docs for Sidr ops be resubmitted as -00 drafts?
I don't think that's something that I will have to discuss with the working group chairs, but I don't think that it's necessary for us to advance them, right? We can actually, all that actually has to happen for a doc to advance is that we move it into the appropriate queue, right? So that we don't have to change the title to do that. I can just make myself the responsible AD.
Okay.
And then click the button, right? So that's not really I don't think there's a process impediment to us doing that.
Okay, she mentions there's 12 docs to go through IESG. It would take a bit of time, or it will, I guess.
Right. So
okay.
my expectation is not that we will just abruptly close down Sidr, although other people can do that if they want, but rather that it will remain open until such point as we see no major impediments to advancing the work.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Declan? Excellent.
Hi, good afternoon, folks. I'm Declan from ZDS. Today, I would like to introduce the update of the document. Sidr, select slide, please. Thank you. Before I introduce update, I would like to we might as well review the what the Sidr document is intended for and how it will do it. So motivation. The motivation is quite straightforward. People want to get some local control ability as far as they are concerned about the impact exerted by the RPK. So, okay. For one thing, network operators may want to selectively override the RPK hierarchy at its discretion as for private internet number resources. And for another thing, network operator may wish to make use of a local override capability to protect routes from the adverse actions. Okay. How would Slurm do it? Slurm would enable the relying party to override the validated cache by adding something and crossing out something. Quite easy. Next slide, please. Update overview. We did reorganizing the layout and rewriting the use case, giving an overview, adding a new figure to the document, adding more text to security considerations. Next slide. Thank you. As for reorganize the layout, to help people to understand the document, to get the idea behind the document easy, this update document go from the general description to the very detail, from section by section. I think it conforms to people's cognitive style. So next slide, please. Use case revision. Slurm was born to do more than coping with the private internet number resources. Though the last version of this document focused on that. Since Slurm takes action to the validated cache, it naturally can be used by the relying party locally to remedy the mistake from the RPK at its discretion. Note that mechanism described here are just applied locally. They don't influence how other network operators to interpret the RPK data. I would reiterate locally as much as I can to keep people away from thinking Slurm is kind of RPK data manipulation. So next slide, please. Yeah, this figure. During update this document, I add this figure to the document, hoping it will deliver a clear message here. Let's looking at 4 seconds. Okay, next slide, please. Excuse me. Security considerations. Since Slurm has the privilege to convey the final information to the routing system, I think it's quite important as a correcting thread from the RPK, between RPK and the routing system. So this section deserves more deliberations and text. To sum up, we need 3 risks in terms of Slurm usage. Manipulation on assertions about non-private internet number resources. That could happen. Errors in the Slurm file are quite obvious. And authenticity and integrity of the Slurm file could be wrecked if the relying party update its Slurm file over the network. Next slide, please. Well, this part is quite is kind of interesting. Tim and Rob, as representative of other relying party software implementation task force, and I were exchanging notes on Slurm file format, which reminded me of this issue, which is which kind of format of Slurm file should be used. And my opinion to this is format is different from format instruction. ABNF based description in this document is actually not the Slurm file, Slurm configuration file, while the JSON XML EM format configuration file is what the relying party would use to configure in practice. That being said, but ABNF-based format is kind of instruction to indicate how the Slurm configuration file should be shaped. So that being said, I think ABNF is really indispensable as for expressing the essential logic of Slurm configuration file. For one thing, implementers have to write new code to make RP to execute the Slurm functionalities. No matter which kind of configuration file you are using. And the Slurm configuration file itself doesn't tell how the RP what to do. It just provides the input information that the Slurm functionality execution needs. So as a conclusion, my personal opinion, my preference on this issue would be keep ABF description in this document to express the essential logic of Slurm file and provide examples of configuration files based on JSON, XML, YAML, respectively, in the appendix if necessary, and let the implementers to make the choice which kind of Slurm configuration file to use. Next slide. Okay, these are the examples of Slurm file. Next slide. Okay, about the implementation plan. Speaking as the administrator of RP Sidr, which by the way is one kind of the reliant party software, we are going to support Slurm functionality in the coming future. By the way, my team is now working on the validation reconsider algorithm. So that's the next job. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay. I would like to extend my thanks to Steve Kent for his guidance and detailed reviews in preparing this document. And thank you very much to Tim Brinsell and Rob Austin for sharing with me their considerations on Slurm file format. Next slide. Okay. I believe that's what I need to say about Slurm. I would like to load the suggestions from chairs on what's the next step for this document, working group last call, or move it to the Sidr ops working group. Thank you.
Questions?
Hi, Tim.
Hi, yes, Tim Bruijsels, right, Mr. Steve. So your last question went unanswered, but I would like to express my opinion on it.
Sure.
Because I think this is actually very operational work. It's about applying local policy to relying party software. So to me, that has a very good home in Sidr ops. Also, I don't think this is completely done yet. So we need to continue discussion on it. So that's the first remark that I'd like to make. And of course, other people can express their opinions, but that's mine. Then, so we actually have been doing a very similar thing in the RIPE NCC RPKI validator for many years now. And so when David made a document, because Ripster is doing some of this as well, and asked for adoption, I said, let's go, because I think it's better to standardize. With regards to the semantics of how you should treat essentially ignore filters, like don't use this that you find in the RPKI, these prefixes or these ES numbers, and let me add my local additions. I have no problems with the document whatsoever. It's actually exactly the same as what we are doing, but it's good to have it defined. What I do have an issue with is the file format, because we did talk about this before, and well, we can agree to disagree, but I think it would be much better if we had, in fact, just one specification for this file format for interoperability's sake. So you could use one of, the 3, in future maybe more, relying party tools that are out there, and interface with them in a similar way.
Mm-hmm.
ABNF format that is currently, or was in the previous document at least, is well defined and is something that can be edited by humans, but library support for it is very limited. So that's why I wouldn't want to have it. I would like to have a format that is both, it's easy to read and edit for humans, but machines alike. Of the other choices, we went through this in private conversations, but I'm sharing this with the group so you know. Yes, you can have XML, but I don't think that's very good for humans either. You can have JSON, which we are currently doing, but still not ideal for humans. I think of the choices there, YAML is probably the best because it's easy to edit, easy to understand, yet there are a ton of libraries out there that allow you to parse this, but also generate this. To us, this is important because part of the updates go through a user interface, not through the command line. So we want to reliably write these things. Then another thing in the content, comments in the file are now just in the file. I believe those should be first-class citizens of the format. We can discuss this later as we continue this work, but then we can preserve them. Finally, I want to suggest future work on this as well, because we're looking at files now, but I believe that an API that allows people to dynamically make changes like this would also be very useful work. So,
Thank you, Tim. I totally agree with you. You've been very helpful to this issue. Just I may miss one thing during my presentation. We have difficult in providing the abstract template for JSON, for instance, format, without providing concrete usage. You know what I mean? ABF is quite easy to express the essential logic, even if you don't have a concrete usage.
well,
So,
I've not reached the conclusion that we cannot specify this, you know.
But I have to
formally
say,
with
in
another
practice,
format.
we have to choose one of the three formats.
I believe it's best to only have one format in there and make the right choice based on something that is both, you know, easy to read for the machines and easy to read for humans, and generate.
Okay.
What was that choice? I missed it. When you
My personal preference would be YAML, and I don't want to speak on Rob Austin's behalf, but he made similar noises. Even though currently we use JSON, I think it's not as human friendly.
Chris, would you please go back to this?
Would you want
Okay,
this?
this one.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the rightmost example there, but it's a bit difficult to read from here. But in any case, that's a discussion we can continue on the list, but it's to exemplify that I don't think this work is there yet. I think it is going in a right direction, and I would love to continue this work in CyberOps.
Tim, I would be happy to see you help me with the issue, to give me to contribute.
Actually,
No.
on the list, I suggested that it would be good if all the major representatives from the major relying party software tools were authors on this document and work together. And I would be happy to do so and contribute more.
Right.
So, Rüdiger for Deutsche Telekom. So let me jump in with what is more a user view, because I'm not developing the software. Though, well, okay, I have been facing problems like that. First off, quite clearly, I agree fully with Tim, there should be one format. Your argument about you prefer ABNF and you don't see anything that could kind of have the semantics, the explanations tagged on is, well, actually, I have been using XML because I have been working for something like 10 years on defining structures and developing processes for it. A schema and a grammar like ABNF is fairly equivalent. And yes, some of these formats that you are showing there are usually accompanied by a schema. And some of these techniques actually have supporting software where you can put in explanations and all that stuff in, kind of exposing the logic that you are after is essentially the question of, is there a schema accompanying the format?
Mr. Wong, thank you for your comments. I think you kind of based on my argument. I think the ABNF-based description here in this document is not for the final use. It's just intended for the. Okay.
If I write a relax ng schema for the XML, it looks damned like a grammar, like your ABNF, and it also is not the final format of what is going in there. But it's defining the syntax, and it exposes the structure on which you want to tag on the semantics.
Okay.
Yeah, and well, okay, for the other formats, probably some way of defining a schema is also available, though at the moment the XML actually does that better.
Okay, thank you. I'm open to this issue. I'm not stubborn with with the usage of ABNF. Okay, we could through this discussion to the main list. Good question.
Yeah, no, yeah. Thank you. I think that would be good. And even if we don't have a formal definition of a YAML format, for example, I think we can do a lot by example and restricting things. Even if a formal specification does not exist, I think we can at least make an attempt to define it in the document, and I think we should pursue that.
Okay. Thank you. All right. And Tim.
All right. Yes.
Pick it up if you like.
I can. That's maybe easier. All right. Yes. Thanks. That's the slide. So tree validation. It is actually one of the documents that is listed for Sidr ops. But let me talk about it a bit again. Previous times we've talked about the whole algorithm that we use, etc., etc. So I don't want to go into any of that right now. I want to talk a bit about the goals that we have with this document and the process. And I have a question for the working group there, or the future working group, Sidr ops actually. So first of all, the title might be a bit misleading because it says tree validation, but it doesn't try to define how this should be done. It's not a best current practices document. It's not a standards document. It is actually an informational document that explains how our specific implementation works. And even though this title might be a bit misleading, or well, the title of the document isn't misleading, but the short name of the file, we've always been open about this, I believe. And so why would we go to the working group with this work? Well, we found it actually really valuable because we want to provide transparency to the users of our software. This is how it works. And we want to get a review by others that this is indeed okay. So we got this review, and I'd like to thank the working group for that, especially also Rob Olstein, who's been doing implementing some of the same ideas that we had. and also Steve Kent, who's provided a long list of comments actually. So what's important to note though is that the document describes what the software does. So there may be discussion about how it could work differently, but the section that describes what the software does is not changed as a result. What we've done in this latest version that I submitted 2 weeks ago, I think, is that we have included comments in the document where there is, possible other concerns or other things you could be doing. We try to include that to provide transparency. But we didn't change the text because our implementation is actually doing what it does. So, well, that's one thing to frame where this document is. Next slide, please. So, a problem that I want to discuss with you is essentially this. This is a moving goal or a target. I mean, this document describes what the software does right now. We intend to make changes in the future, small changes, maybe big changes, and that goal will move. So, next slide, please. How do we deal with that? Going through the working groups can be a bit of a heavy process. But again, we really like the transparency and the review, so that's why we're doing it. So after considering many options, what we would propose is that we actually go for last call on the current document pretty soon. This can also be in Sidr ops. If people feel that their concerns are not properly represented in the document, then we can of course revisit that. But in the sense that it describes what the software does, and that won't change in the next, let's say, 6 months, I believe it can go final. Then for future updates, if they're minor, what we could do is just include them with our release of the software, like a README. Okay, it does what this RFC says, but there's some minor changes here and there. And if we have enough of them and it stabilizes, or if we have major changes, we can take that back to the Sidr ops working group. And then discuss with the working group whether we should do this or new document, and whether the working group wants to take it on, or we do it as an individual submission even, just to make sure that we do have a, let's say, independent document describing this. Alternative to this is that we don't do all this process, and we just thank the working group for all the work. We include the document with each release, and if we have changes, we update it. But then, of course, we don't have a formal review by others. We are providing transparency, but you just have to believe us on our word when you read this document. So it's less ideal in a way. So I was just wondering where people in this working group stand, and people in Sidr ops will be standing on this. Do you have preferences, ideas about this? I would love to hear. And that's it. Questions? Comments?
Anybody?
So that doesn't really give me an answer to my question on whether the proposal that I did actually is go for last call and deal with updates. Yeah, leave this here. Does this work for people, or do you think it should be done differently?
Rüdiger Volk, Deutsche Telekom. I think it works. At some point in time, I would guess that you will rather switch to your users forum for asking for feedback. But as we start up Sidr ops and the user base may not have that much expertise in looking at all the critical places, I think kind of the reviewing here or in Sidr ops should be fine. And not every revision actually has to go to RFC.
John Scudder. As long as people want to do the review in the group, it seems great. I will say it's unique in my experience for a vendor or a software project or whatever to make use of the IETF publication process as a way of doing QA review for their product. But if people want to do it, seems like doesn't hurt anyone. So go crazy.
Dan York relaying for Sandy Murphy. Oh, two things, I guess. She said, I can see benefit to have a standard set of topics to be covered in any such implementation description. She thinks Rudiger said something like that once. And she also asks, would a wiki be better than a document? ADs have recommended wiki as a substitute for the previous routing desire for implementation reports. In parentheses, an implementation report was done for RPKI-RTR.
Randy Bush, DRL. John, I think we've got many examples of Flogistron Company's implementation of Protocol X and Flogistron Company's Protocol X as RFCs. Right. Yeah. It's a stock way of doing it, and that's, I think, the path Tim's taking. What's confusing us here is he's proposing a moving target.
Well, yes, because implementation will change in future. I don't want to go in details now, but we have many ideas of things that we could be doing differently. Regarding wikis or user forum, the point is this describes just the validation process, right? It doesn't describe everything of the software. It's very specific on that. And judging whether that is a correct way to do things requires very good knowledge of how the RPKI works. So in that sense, I'm not sure that the user forum would work. I'm not sure how the wikis work in the IETF, but because it describes what we actually do, we need to have the edit token on it, because you cannot just change it and then our software does something different suddenly. That's not how it works, right? So I would prefer to keep control of the document, but have some form of processing. And another suggestion earlier was that maybe we accept that it never gets to RFC, but we just have a document that gets updated. You spin up a new version and you says, well, it's a living document. That would also work for me, if that works for the working group. But okay, maybe we should wrap up, because I don't think we get all those things answered right here, but I wanted to make the question really explicit to you guys. So what do you think? Should we just address this inside our ops stand and ask how to proceed? Should we go for last call on this one so we have a baseline and then continue with future work? That would kind of have my preference, just to have something wrapped up.
Joel Yeagley. I think those are open questions. There are certainly things that we could ask the mailing list. You probably want to do it when it's slightly more populated, because it will be a bit of an echo chamber at the moment. But I think it's perfectly legitimate, given that expired RFCs never, or RFCs, expired drafts never really disappear at this point. That a draft at a particular revision will be quite stable for some time. So, like, if you want to treat it like that, I think that's fine, and that actually requires no consensus.
Well, but that is part of the problem, because then if you do finalize it, then you can demonstrate that you've gone through a consensus process and that people agree that it describes what you need to describe.
Right. Well, so I think that's a question that we can ask at that time, right? Because one of the problems with asking for consensus is if the rest of the community at that time, as opposed to say now, is inclined to make changes, and you aren't because it's, your thing, then that's not really a consensus process. But again, that's a bridge we could cross at some future time without having to solve it today.
Sure, but allow me to nuance that a bit, because I feel that if people see blocking issues with our implementation, I really would like them to speak up, and I wouldn't want to call this final, and I would want to change the software. If there's difference in opinion of you could go left or right, but there's not really clear what is the best way, then I want to go with what we do.
Yeah, so I think when this is instantiated, you could ask the then chairs for adoption, which would be a way to call that a forcing function.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Thanks, Tim. And Oliver.
Hello, my name is Oliver Borchert. I'm with NIST. I'm presenting today the latest status of the BERT BGP-SEC implementation and the Quagga SRX implementation. We also have a third, I would say like a half BGP-SEC implementation. It's called BGP-SEC-IO, which is a traffic generator. Next slide, please. So just very quick, BGP-SEC-IO allows you to very, very easily generate large-scale BGP-SEC traffic. You can script it very easily. It can receive BGP-SEC traffic and print it out in the kind of Wireshark form. We don't print out every little thing like MPNRI or something like this, but we focus mainly on the BGP-SEC path attribute. It's, as I said, very easy to configure. Has configuration script, goes via command line. You can pipe in traffic, etc. If you're more interested in that, you can grab me after that, and then I can show you, or we can talk a little bit about that. And it also can test just crypto modules for BGP-SEC parsing. So what that means is in the Quagga SRX implementation, we extracted the whole crypto part. So Quagga basically just does the policy processing and the BGP-SEC path processing to the extent it needs to basically make syntax check and so forth. But then we just hand over the whole BGP-SEC path attribute into a crypto module, what then can be changed easily with plugins and something like that. So this tool can basically just make these calls and doesn't have to talk BGP as well, what is very good for if you want to make speed tests or performance improvements. Next slide. So what I want to show today is just a very simple topology from AS10 to AS50. We have traffic generated by a Quagga SRX, these three ASs on the left side. It goes into a BERT, to another BERT, to another Quagga SRX, to another Quagga SRX. We have one row in the system that allows AS10 to produce, to announce these three prefixes. Then we have AS100 with BGP-SEC-IO. Bad guy wants to hijack the traffic. Next slide. Also, if you have it on your computer, it's sometimes a little bit difficult to follow everything. I would recommend to stay on slide 4 so that you know what's going on. So what you see on the very top is basically all the windows of the AS instances. We have 10, 20, 30, 10, 20, 40, and 50. Then on the upper right, we also have like a RPKI cache test harness kind of thing, where we can inject ROAs with RPKI protocol. We do not make any validation or something. It's just a very simple whitelist generator that feeds into the Quagga SRX. Then underneath there, you see the AS100. That's the BGP-SEC-IO. Then we have AS30, one BERT instance, and a terminal to AS50. The terminal to AS50 is just to see that in the very end, the traffic goes in and gets validated. Next slide. So I start everything up. And you see on AS30, that's the BERT implementation. You see the paths coming, the three prefixes coming in via 10, 20. They're validated valid. Then in AS50, you see the whole path and everything is valid as well. To this one, very quick to explanation in Quagga SRX, we have the V, then you have the brackets VV. So in Quagga SRX, basically we combine origin validation with BGP-SEC path validation, and you can turn off one thing, turn on the other thing. And then we calculate out of this overall validation of the update. So the first V is basically the overall validation, valid. The second V is the RPKI ROA validation result, and the third V is basically BGP-SEC path validation. Next slide. So then I go back to AS40. You see there no, next slide. So you see here as well, we have 10, 20, 30. Now we are in AS40, sorry. Next slide. So now we want to add the traffic. If you look up there in the AS100 slide, so we start the BGP IO and we announce exactly the same prefixes. Next slide. So down here now on the terminal of AS40, which is connected to AS100, you see basically it received the additional 3 updates. Next slide. So that makes it a little bit bigger. So you see if you didn't see the Quagga output before, so this is the AS path, and over there is basically the prefix. The greater than sign is basically showing you the selected path. You see that in all 3 instances, still the longer path is selected, even though the path validation was successful because it was AS100 that announced it. It used its own key. It could be validated. But the origin validation complained because we didn't have the raw for that, so the whole update itself is invalid, and our policies prefer valid, and we don't select it. Next slide. So, sorry. So the prefix hijack was unsuccessful. Path validation passed, but the origin validation failed. Next slide. So now AS100 becomes a little bit more. He announces, or he prepends AS10 and announces this in the hope to that now to be successful with the origin validation. Next slide. So we stop everything. You see again that on AS40 the announced routes are withdrawn. Next slide. The new announcements are done. Now what you see is basically we receive, next slide, we receive path 110 with the prefix, and you see in the validation now the origin validation passed, but the path validation failed. Next slide. Yeah, that's what I just said. Next slide. So that was just very briefly to show you that we have 2 implementations that can do what we intend to do. And yeah, question.
All right, no questions? Everyone kept track of what was going on? Path validation, origin validation, both working. Seems pretty cool. All right. Thanks, Oliver. All right. Randy and maybe Tim.
You can tell it's Tim by Comic Sans.
Because the Comic Sans in the purple? Oh. Only one person's coming up, though. Oh.
It don't think anybody's coming up either. It was asked to do this.
You spoke up. Not my fault.
Somebody's got to stand in the magenta box. I don't. So the last meeting, we made the mistake. I work in the NOC. I can stand wherever the hell I want. At the last meeting, I made the mistake of standing up and saying, how are we testing all this crud? Thank you, Oliver, for giving one example and an excellent, delicious one. And somehow the chairs got it in their minds that we should talk about it. So we'll try to do so. What are the pieces that we've thought of so far? And this is not an exhaustive list. Seeing that CAs interoperate, seeing that caches all produce the same result, right, would be nice, aside from issues of time skew, right? Do caches fetch from each other? Can they, in my, I've got a big ISP, near my router's walled off, right? I let very little through. I would like the caches in that rack to talk to caches in another rack, but not go to the global RPKI. How does that work, especially now with the change to RRDP? We understood it with rsync, Okay. Do routers produce consistent results at all? And do they produce it with multiple caches? And do routers actually do their job? Clicky wiki. Thank you. So let's talk about certificate authority testing. Do the actual CAs, and I'm not sure this list is exhausted. Oh no, APNIC has a separate CA, I think. I'm not, et cetera. Do those CAs interoperate? And for example, right now, click please. We have an example where RIPE has a child and that child has a child. So that's RIPE interacting with Dragon Labs, interacting with Dragon Labs vertically, as in the right-hand side there. But what happens when you've got somebody big like AT&T who has resources from RIPE and from ARIN and other RIRs, of course, and may have also RFC 1918 resources that they want to validate internally? Okay, and so does this work? We don't know. We hope so. This would be a very typical scenario for a large provider, like Rudiger's nodding his head vigorously. Okay, and we should be testing this in Q1 and reporting in Chicago, because if this isn't working, we're in deep doo-doo. Yeah.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Want to ask another?
Yes. So this is work you're proposing for Sidr Ops to have a report in Chicago. Yes.
It's work I'm proposing. I don't give a damn
Okay. Good.
about the administrative
about the
and
locale of discussion. Okay.
Chicago's bad enough. The other aspects.
Okay.
I've lived in Chicago. Okay. So validators, caches, whatever we call them today, do they produce consistent results? We actually, Jay Borkenhagen of AT&T is actually working on this and testing, and occasionally we find surprises. So now this one's a Tim. You want to speak to it, Tim? Yeah, good. Tim and I are actually co-conspirators. He's just shyer than I am.
Shall I use this mic or that? This? Okay. Yes. So when Randy mentioned validators, caches, feeding off caches, I thought, this might be an interesting topic for Sidr Ops actually. Now all the implementations, none of the implementations do this right now. But they fetch data, they do validation, and then there's a part that speaks to the routers or gets spoken to by the routers. But you could also split that out. You could split these functions out in something that is just concerned with fetching that may live in some part of your network. You can have a validator that may be in another part of your network where it's more secure, that can just get that data. You may want to use two for redundancy. And then that data, the validated data itself, may go to caches that are closer to your routers, whose only function there is to just provide that to routers. So you isolate these functions for redundancy, scalability, and security, I suppose. I don't know if this is really worthwhile, but I think it's definitely one of the things that are worth considering in Sidr Ops.
My personal opinion, worth everything you pay for it, is the first is actually useful in large ISPs who should not put, should have a couple externally facing fetchers. Separating the second and the third bothers me because I don't outsource security. Right? I want that validation right near my router, because the RPKI router protocol strips all the crypto. The router is betting its lunch on the validator. So, but that's just a personal opinion, and I imagine folk could have scenarios in which they would be more comfortable breaking all three pieces out. But if we do this, this is some more interesting interoperability testing. What happens if we want Tim's fetcher with Rob Alstein's validator with, some arbitrary cache? Thank you, sir. So, router testing. Do routers perform correctly? We want to measure the semantics. I'm not so much interested in speed. I think we want continual regression testing, right? All of us who are of any scale have labs with stacks of routers that we're constantly beating to death to see that last year's bugs are still there and that they haven't improved. Next, please. So this is a fantasy of mine I had back in 2013. And it's stolen from I was born a compiler writer. And this is kind of a model of a harness from the 70s? From the 70s, from compiler validation tools, where you have the device under test, you have stuff driving it, you have stuff receiving from it, you have test definitions, control, et cetera, results, reports. And we hope that this is well digested and you don't have to read all those pages of reports. Okay, next. And so the assumption in that is that the RPKI implementation itself is tested, and the caches are tested, and the RPKI router protocol service is tested, so that we can control the cache content and change it and watch the router behave. Okay, we can control the BGP feed at a very fine granularity and watch the router behave. And I'll leave this up for a moment or two. There's actually a doc file with some suggestions for testing progress, et cetera, et cetera. If somebody wants to fetch that URL. Yeah. So how to test these things reproducibly and constantly to ensure against regression and making sure nobody's ever fixing their bugs. Dan.
Actually, Dan being Sandy. She says, about flexible cache topologies, seems one scenario to support was bringing up brand new ISP, getting RPKI data when it did not have global routing working, but had a local connection to a neighbor or IXP.
Yeah. I think my memory is things are designed to come up with no cache for validation, because they'll all be not, what's the state? Unknown, or whatever we call that unknown state, and you'll probably route on it. And in my mind, Rudiger's thinking, this is dangerous.
I think that question may point into the area of, well, okay, how is a resource owner actually monitoring what is happening in the RPKI about his resource? It's supposed to be represented somehow. And, well, okay, that representation will have some consequences in the evaluation. And I guess that point of view is kind of not yet covered by Sidr and future. Well, okay, the discussion so far, and your testing scenarios as well.
So how do I, as a resource holder, query the RPKI global view to see what the story is about my resources?
And check that the CAs that take care of representing my resource
Well, the CA
maybe,
also-
maybe misrepresenting what I want there.
Well, the CAs all have wonderful GUIs which lie to me. And so what you're talking about is looking at the RPKI data as distributed. We haven't made any tools to do so that I'm aware of. Tim, have you?
No, I haven't. I just wanted to talk about this slide, actually.
That's cheating.
Well, if people want to talk on this subject, they can wait.
Oliver Borchitnis. Regarding your question of testing routers with the RPKI to router protocol, we developed many years ago, maybe 5 years ago, or 4 years ago, a tool called Bright, which allows you to connect. It's bright.antd.nis.gov, and it allows you to connect your router against a test system, and then we send you via RPKI protocol some ROAS, we send you some traffic, and we see what you sent back. And then we give you a little report if what you sent back was what we expected. So that might be an interesting thing to look in.
What you sent back in terms of the RPKI
So basically the way how
protocol response.
Yeah, so basically we monitor BGP4 traffic. So I sent you, you connect, for example, against 3 routers. And one of them is a monitor, and then the other 2, one sent, for example, longer path, the other one a shorter path. Then we sent you so normally you select the shorter path, and then we send you a ROA for the longer one, and then we see how do you deal with this now with a ROA having, do you switch over to the shorter path, etc., etc. And that tool can be extended. There's like a complete scripting language or something like that. So it's worthwhile looking into. And back then it was in the NANOC in Philadelphia, I think. Yeah, there we presented it. But at this time, nobody really thought about RPKI, and it was a little bit before our time. So, but I think right now that's a good tool, what one can go back and say, okay, is there more what we need? Maybe more tests, because we only have a very short or very small amount of tests in there. But
Yeah, that sounds like a good start.
Yeah, actually, that feeds quite well into what I wanted to say about this, because so how to test, I'm not sure. This sounds like a component. Also, from our perspective, I'm not sure how much time I myself and my team might have for this going into Chicago to set up a test framework itself. It's not something that we normally do, but what we would quite happily do is act as the upstream CA and have our validator run there and look into any issues that might be revealed. That I see very big value in for us. Also, when we do future releases of the relying party software, I see this as a very good thing to have. Does it work as expected? Of course, we do our own testing, but having something extra is quite useful. So.
And this is the obvious question. Now for the bureaucratic overhead. How the heck do we organize to get this done? Tim and I are hoping to do, Tim and Rob Alstein and I are hoping to do some CA interoperability testing, as I said. Beyond that, we have no specific plans.
So Paul Matthews, just a quick suggestion. Have you considered approaching UNH for this type of interop testing, right? They have this big interop lab. So.
Can I ask who you are and where you're from?
You did say.
Oh, did you? Sorry.
Paul Matthews, Nokia, yes.
Sorry.
So anyway, I know they do all sorts of testing on this type of stuff. Well, not this type of stuff, but they do all sorts of.
Yeah, UNH has a history. Are you in a position to ping them?
It's just they talked about this in the presentation.
Him to go to the mic.
Oh.
No.
Carlos, you folk thinking of playing in with any of this?
Carlos Martinez Lagnic. We definitely see the value of this, but I share the same concern as Tim. But I don't know how much time my team will have to put into such a project. However, I think we should keep actually working on this and perhaps come up with a list of more detailed activities so we can actually make a decision on that.
I think we're all agreed it's a worthwhile activity for somebody else to do.
I don't want to commit to something that I won't be able to
Understand.
deliver, but I think if we can decompose this in, I would say, more atomic projects or activities, maybe we can find a way of actually either outsourcing that or bringing help from the outside or even do that ourselves.
Yeah, again, to repeat, the only thing that I can commit to now is to continue what we're doing already, where we test our operation as a CA, and we can redo that work to other child CAs, and that we can help test our validator in a framework. But I cannot commit to setting up a full infrastructure for doing this testing at this time, if that makes sense. But I would very happily work with people who do.
Could you backstep to the Yep. Can Ripe and Aaron and Lacknick, who I think are all three here, probably AP Nick is here too, I think. Yeah, then Afrinick's here. Hey, Daniel. Could you have, all of you have, I believe, test instances. Am I correct in that? Test in CA instances. So can we as a group commit to building a complex mess of CA infrastructure that stays, and Rob and I are, I'm Jay, et cetera, and maybe even Chris, to having a second level infrastructure below it and so forth that stays up, that we can keep beating on, and that continues to test as we do new versions so that we have regression testing.
Okay, Rüdiger Volk again. Yes, I was stepping up exactly for the question for clarification whether your test plan was for test environments or for the actual production thing. And at least for getting started in the early years, I think that the test instances should be used, and yes, the commitment, say, from RIPE NCC to have the test instance, I think, is unwavering. And I would hope so that the other RIRs actually do the same.
Mark Hosters, Aaron. We do have an OTE environment set up with all our tools that replicates what we do in production, and encourage those who want to test to use that environment.
Do those who are testing have to satisfy all the legal and requirements, et cetera?
No.
Thank you.
Not in a test environment, of course.
Right.
Just
Yeah.
Oliver Budgetnist. What I also
Sorry, can't hear you.
Oliver Budgetnist. What I also would like to see, if there are test instances of caches, that they also have an open ports for the 6810 bis 7 or at least for the
There
API
are open RRDP caches. Yes.
Okay, yeah, then let's talk later, because especially for the routing implementation, that's what I'm very much interested in to run against.
Yeah, so we have a test environment. It's, well, it tends to be up 24/7, but it's not a 24/7 service as such.
It's a test environment.
Exactly. But I think we need to talk.
Having it go down is part of the test.
Yes. So one of the, yes. And one of the things there is that, I mean, it uses the same mechanisms as our normal environment in that you have to be a Right N C member to use it, etc. So I think we need to talk offline about how we can, what we can do here if you're not a member, etc. So I would suggest we talk later, but we do have a test environment, and I see value in using that and figuring out if there's anything in the provisioning protocol that is broken, of course.
Tom Harrison, OpenIC. We have a test bed at the moment. It's publicly available, so we should be able to do some work around this in that timeframe.
Daniel Shaw, Afrinic. Our current testbed is not public right now. However, we have one internally, so if there was a request for someone that wanted a testbed, I don't see an issue in opening it up.
I think from the operator point of view, it's important that we know we interoperate with all RIRs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll echo
Thank you.
Ripe and Lacnic that I support this work and but don't have resources to do anything myself.
Taiji from JPNIC. We have 3 types of testbed, and one is public. So we means in JPNIC, we have monitoring system for the validation for all objects published by JPNIC system. But if you have such test environment for all objects issued by RIRs or subordinated CA under RIL, is good to see the how to say that, the number of validated robots in the world, I think.
Yeah, in the AP-NIC region, we inflict ourselves with a subsidiary national registries. So I think it would be interesting if you, Yufu, and Taiji would set up national registries under AP-NIC so that we're actually playing in a test bed that is real.
Yeah. Yufu from CNIC. We already have a testing bed in our name. So, but this testing bed is not on public, but we will public soon. I think maybe next year. So I'm very interested for this. I will, if you want to me to join this, I will. I'm very interested for this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that concludes our meeting. Unless anybody has any questions, please make sure you sign a blue sheet. You get back like an hour and a half.
There we go. Good. I'm glad. I shut down like every app I could to make sure nothing showed up on the screen. Yeah.
Hi. I'm Zhang Ren from Tsinghua University. And currently we are doing some research related application for AI. Not only for the security interdomain, we can see it can also be used in inter-AI source address validation.